This idea of digital surveillance, digital censorship, information war came and hit me in the face. And that was March, April 2020, and the pandemic, as it was so called, kicked off. And the consequent 2 years of just barrage of information that required sifting through and required primary research and required, frankly, a pretty thick skin to say, no, I don't agree with this, was largely perpetrated using large private companies and their digital monopolies. And this was what was so interesting about the whole situation. It was nefarious at its very core, right? The White House, literally like a week ago, has admitted that COVID came out of the Wuhan lab. Like, hooray, we finally made it. I remember my wife saying that to me back in 2020. I was like, you fucking kidding me? That can't possibly be true. And so it's a nefarious cover-up job from day one, and the amount of people that have side effects or have died from these horrible injections, it's absolutely shocking. Anyway, that's not why I'm diving down this particular topic, and just to put that to the side for the second, I remember very clearly I had a day in Melbourne, and we're in an inner city suburb, and I would get up and leave the house in the morning. And in some ways, it's so traumatic. I can't remember if this is all on the same day or if I've kind of like meshed it all together. But at one point on our little suburban street, there was a school at the end, and the school's car park was being used as a COVID testing center. The COVID testing center was a bunch of tents that were put up by the public health department of the government of Victoria, and the queue went all the way up the street right in front of my front door. And I would go down to the guys running this thing. I'd be like, excuse me, we've got kids in the house. You can't tell me what this thing is. I've got people standing on my doorstep from 8 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock at night. Like, what's going on? Oh, sorry, mate, call the government. And it's like, okay, well, what's happening here? It's like, I owned 198 square meters of land. And as soon as I stepped onto that pavement, it was the government's. And there was nothing I could do about this. There's this real sense of helplessness. It's like, what the fuck is going on? Anyway, you'd come out of your door with the dog in the morning. There's already people in masks queuing up to go to this testing center. And then you'd walk out into the corner, and there's then a medical center that's got a huge makeshift sign outside being like, get your COVID-19 vaccine. And there was a kind of special tented entrance that they created. And I'd seen, a 15-year-old boy coming out with his mum, like hanging his arm, hanging down. I'm like, oh my God, what is going on? This is insane. You then go to the park with the dog, and there'd be people walking their dogs with masks on, and they'd look at you through like, just, what are you doing without a mask on? You'd go from there to the coffee shop, and the coffee shop wouldn't let you sit inside the coffee shop or enter the coffee shop without showing proof of vaccination records. And there were then big stickers on all the cafe tables saying you can't sit here unless you've shown us your medical certificates. I wasn't able to go to a business lunch. I got uninvited to it because I wasn't vaccinated. And, sometimes you're in the office, sometimes you weren't allowed in the office. You're not allowed to go to any of the sports stadiums. You're not allowed to go to the cinema, not allowed to go to any restaurants. And then you pick your phone up, and in the top right-hand corner where it would say 4G or 5G, Telstra saying, let's vax. And then you turn the TV on, and there's government of Victoria, Australia, giving adverts about XYZ as to why it's really important to go and get your vaccine. And you're just like, whoa, this is the biggest advertising campaign I've ever seen, without a shadow of a doubt. And if you even remotely questioned what was going on, you were a pariah. Public health is more important than individual choice. Get away from me. It's like, whoa, what is going on here? Anyway, long story short, the social media platforms were absolutely playing their parts. The Twitter files is a great example, since Elon Musk bought that business and opened up all of the stuff that had been going on. There's thousands and thousands of examples of the US government intervening on what was or wasn't allowed to be said. The same applied here in Australia. Zuckerberg, who's paying him? Well, at the end of the day, you're the user, right? Oh, it's really easy to create an account. It's really easy to create content. It's really easy to share my message. Oh, I just use it to hang out with my family and friends. At what cost? Well, the cost is very clear. You're operating on someone else's real estate. So you go and say something that they don't like, shadow banned. Oof, just like, oops, no one's finding my profile any longer. Freedom of speech, but no freedom of reach. And then it's like, oh no, actually now community guidelines says you, and your whole channel just cancelled. This happened to some friends of mine on all these different platforms, right? And at the end of the day, I respect the rights of a private business to treat their customers however they so wish, right? If you don't want me on your platform, that's your choice. It's not sold as that, right? It's like, your money in the bank. Oh, it's yours. Come and spend all your life with us and we'll look after you. It's actually like all your money is being used to make more money on the back end. And the moment that you put it in there, it's not actually yours. It's kind of the same. And so this advertising model, where I've heard it more recently called surveillance capitalism, which is a nice phrase for it. It clearly makes people addicted. It's designed to be addicted. It clearly makes people sick mentally. It clearly is basically at the whim of the highest bidder. What I mean by that is, who's their customer? Who's actually paying these people? And when you start digging into that, it's very clear who's paying them. And they get what they want, right? And with that, it's like, where do you get your information from? What's real? What's not real? And it's just, it's a fucking mess at the end of the day. You're like, wow, what the hell is going on out there? So much so that you're like, why do I know what I know? Anyway, all this goes to say, I think I first came across Nostr. It's only 2 years old. So Nostr, for those that don't know, Nostr is a decentralized protocol in the same way that Bitcoin is a decentralized protocol. And Nostr was born out of a community of Bitcoin Lightning developers. And they were looking at basically online transactions, micropayments, Bitcoin native. And they've borrowed some of the really interesting design that Bitcoin has. So you have a Nostr account is really a key pair. So you have an npub and an nsec. And the nsec in particular is the private key for a Nostr profile. And every time that Nostr profile posts notes, so Nostr stands for notes and other stuff over relay, every time that account posts something, it has to have been done by those two keys. The problem with social media traditionally is just so obvious, right? They're called walled gardens, monopolies, and they just do not allow for anything that their customers, i.e. the advertising and the paying customers, don't allow for. And I'm sure that you think about your own experiences on these platforms, you'll have plenty to go with that highlights this. Anyway, Nostr, it's really small, 18,000 users, but everything you state on this everything that you broadcast to the network cannot be deleted, full stop. And with that in mind, it's like, as a user, it's like, if I post this, I can't retract it. So it immediately alters your interaction with it, which is fascinating. Okay, you're almost more accountable to your word. And in the same way that Bitcoin is the first time that we stumbled across like digital scarcity. Like, digital scarcity did not exist before Bitcoin because you just copy paste anything. Nostr's kind of similar, but in speech. You're like, whoa, okay, that account had to have said that because that key pair signed off that post. And with that in mind, it's like, okay, so I've played around with content creation, posting podcasts, writing tweets, doing Instagram. And I've had varying success with different ideas and different attempts. But hang on, so if I put my time and energy into building a Twitter profile, or now as it's called X, formerly Twitter, or into an Instagram profile, or into a YouTube channel, what happens if they switch me off? Well, it's gone. That's it. Finished. And from an investor perspective, from a capital allocator perspective, that's a very poor decision. You're building on quicksand. Well, what's Nostr? Well, Nostr actually is kind of like Bitcoin, right? You're building with steel instead of wood. It can't catch fire. You've got a solid foundation to build an audience from. And as soon as you start playing around with it, you then start to dig into the deeper layers, which I think will prove to be where the genuine value is driven. But Nostr currently is an uncensorable social media experience. And that, initially at least, is enough to get attention. It's like, okay, well, if I start posting on this thing, it can't be taken away from me. Is that right? And it's like, yes, that's right. Okay, cool. Well, I'm going to try. And that for me was enough. I don't want to be switched off. It's absolutely imperative that that's actually not possible. And there's a big difference between not being able to be switched off and saying you won't be. Like a Rumble, for example. Oh, we believe in free speech. Sure. The CEO ends up in some jail, they'll persuade him to change the rules. Or Telegram. This recently happened with Telegram, right? The messaging app, super popular messaging app. And the CEO got caught out in France, and before you know it, they've started changing some of their privacy regulations. It's only human, and that's okay. But recognizing that's the important thing. So it's like, okay, what's this Nostr thing? After a year or so of having a profile, playing around a bit, I started up my new podcast, and I was absolutely adamant that Nostr was part of the production. And so if I think through my podcast, you've got production, publishing, and promotion. It's like the three main columns of what you actually have to complete in order to get a podcast out there. And so it's a case like, how does Nostr fit into that process? Well, it's not really part of the production process per se, but it absolutely is part of the publishing. So I use something called Nostr.build, where I can upload short form videos, and Nostr.build is basically it's like a host for this data. If you log into your X account and you post something, who's paying for that and how's it stored? Well, they're paying for it, X, in favor of you spending their time there. And so again, you're the product, right? There are real world costs to having an Instagram profile that someone else is bearing in favor of them being able to advertise to you. Nostr's different. It's more of a pay to play. I also pay for Primal, became a paying subscriber of theirs, and also Albi. And these tools all help me to piece together different aspects of what now a Nostr experience actually is. One of my main concerns with posting on Nostr was reach. I was like, but just what's the point? There's no one on there. No one's going to look at it. And what's interesting, i.e. the point of this solo riff, is that in my first week, I had more views on Nostr than all of the legacy platforms combined, times by 4. Whoa, that is a big difference. Now, admittedly, after week 2, week 3, that's shifted, and that's because it's just how it works, and it's very interesting. I'm going to track these numbers over time and see how it evolves. But it's certainly something that it wasn't obvious that was going to be the case, and that's okay. So that's why I'm sharing with you too. It's so interesting. Nostr, okay, you post stuff on there, people are actually seeing it, and I'll post a short form video, 5 minutes long, and I'll get 130 unique views. Now that's not massive, but it's not nothing. And there's no algorithm with Nostr that's like resurfacing content the same way like a YouTube video can be resurfaced on someone's feed years later. That's not happening, at least not yet. Someone might build that, and you might subscribe to a client that shows you old footage around a specific hashtag or around a specific topic. I don't know how that's going to work, but it will get built, I'm sure. And so, in conclusion, Nostr is already an interesting place to post content. What I know absolutely deep down is that, and I'm tempted to do this in a sense, what would it look like if you went Nostr only? You don't bother with RSS feeds into iTunes. You don't bother with YouTube. You don't bother with X. And at this stage, the reason I haven't done that is because the marginal cost increase of just blasting my content everywhere is actually not that high. And so therefore, I feel like it makes sense to leverage these existing tools to just put this message out there, to broadcast this stuff. And that's a good word, actually. That's how I'm starting to think of. So when I think of Instagram or YouTube or X or TikTok that I'm going to use as well, it's not social for me. I'm not hanging out on those platforms and replying to comments all the time and trying to make friends with people. They are broadcasting platforms for me to get this content out to and see what comes back. Whereas Nostr, I'm actually spending time replying to people, looking at what they're actually creating, and I know it's because it's a better capital allocation.